Hey guys, tonight we're exploring something so outrageous, so unfiltered, so questionably aromatic that you'll want to confirm you didn't accidentally drop your earbuds in a jar of lavender water. That's right. Tonight we're discussing the absolutely revolting hygiene practices of Victorian ladies. This isn't Pride and Prejudice, it's not even The Crown, it's more like if the Crown ran out of shampoo, razors, antiperspirant and dignity. So before you settle in, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I create here. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and whether you still use baby powder. Now lower the lights, turn on a fan for that ambient sound and get as cozy as you can. Let's take a breath. Have you ever pondered just how awful Victorian body stench really was? Did ladies truly collapse from restrictive corsets? Or was it the odour? Did anyone even brush their teeth? Or did they just wave some mint leaves at their mouth and call it good? Could you last 7 days in a home where everyone cleans their hair with egg whites, borax, or simply wishful thinking? What about cosmetics? Did Victorians create the natural makeup trend because their face powder was actually poisonous? Did they have a preferred deodorant? Or was the response just nope? Absolutely never. What occurs when your daily shower habit gets replaced with one sponge bath in freezing water in front of your whole extended family and 3 bewildered cats? And now, congratulations! You've just awakened in the year 1852. You're in London, you're a lady, you have a complex relationship with soap, and you're about to learn that the good old times were mostly good at creating mould and permanent psychological damage. Welcome to the aromatic, grime-covered and faintly flowery hellscape that is Victorian cleanliness. Good fortune. You awaken with sunlight pouring through delicate lace curtains, dust particles floating through the atmosphere, and the subtle fragrance of unwashed for 72 hours. In the Victorian era, body stench isn't merely a reality of existence, it's the third party in every romance. It begins before you even lift your eyelids. You shift over in bed, sensing the heaviness of thick, seldom washed wool covers pressing down. They smell vaguely of dust, moisture, and something suspiciously resembling steamed vegetables. There's a wishful thought that this is just your mind playing tricks. Perhaps you're still sleeping, but no, this is actual life. A cosy, somewhat stale cocoon infused with last week's lavender pouch. This week's dirty linens, and the remnants of a winter spent attempting to avoid lung fever. You take your first deep breath of the morning. It's complex. The atmosphere is scented with a mixture that contemporary candle makers would never dare create. Equal portions aged sweat, half-dissolved rose essence, and the mild bite of damp wool. It's an aroma that lingers, and not just on you. Every cushion, every bed, every thread of your nightdress is gently soaked in the daily rhythm of human living. No matter how many pouches of dried flowers you shove into the linen cabinet downstairs, the scent remains equally powerful. In the tight quarters of a Victorian bedroom, air movement is a hopeful theory at most. You open a window only to find that the fresh breeze outside must compete with London's notorious haze. Equal portions, coal fumes, horse droppings, and the lingering essence of 10,000 smokestacks puffing away into the sunrise. The most you can manage is hope for a wind that changes just enough to carry in a hint of rainfall instead of the neighbour's vegetable broth. In this era, washing is an infrequent occasion reserved for special moments, sickness, or unplanned plunges in the stream. If you're fortunate, you managed a cloth bath last week, which means you're only slightly less pungent than everyone else in the residence. Antiperspirant is purely theoretical. Most ladies depend on a swift touch of rose essence behind the ears, a sprinkling of baby powder under the arms, or, when situations get truly desperate, a dab of vinegar, which mainly serves to invent the world's first biological warfare. But you're not isolated in your fragrance. Victorians find solace in the reality that everyone smells roughly the same. It's a scented equality. There are no premium deodorants, no medical-grade sprays, and no air freshener to save the day. Instead, you simply adapt to it. your household, your companions, your potential suitors, they all possess their own distinctive aroma, and somehow you persevere, building deep, significant connections in a fog of historical body funk. This isn't to suggest there aren't efforts to disguise the unavoidable. Gentlemen might apply cologne on their neckties, while ladies attach scented balls to their undergarments or slip mint sprigs into their sleeves. But there's only so much you can accomplish when everyone in the residence is wrapped in 3 layers of wool, linen, and unwashed hopefulness. By late morning, the aromas blend into something completely distinctive. A scented greeting that declares, "Good morning, I made it through the night." And then, naturally, there are the animals. Cats curling up on the mattress, dogs snoring beside the fireplace, and the occasional hen making an unauthorized appearance, each adding their own particular note to the grand orchestra of morning. You're never truly isolated. There's always a subtle undertone of wet fur and barnyard enigma as you pull yourself upright, hair already sticking to your forehead. You accept your destiny. There will be no showers, no perfumed lotions, and no escape. Just another day started in a haze of stench. Yesterday, courageously confronting the world one sniff at a time. And who can say, maybe tomorrow you'll recall to apply a bit more rose essence. Or maybe you'll just accept it. The morning aroma proof that you're breathing, enduring, and still incredibly optimistic. Forget modern plumbing. Your day starts with a quick shuffle to the chamber vessel, a ceramic bowl quietly tucked beneath the bed, waiting to torment your dreams and nose. For the next several hours, you attempt not to acknowledge the chamber vessel. That thing. It's positioned there, patient and always observing, adorned with a worn floral design that does absolutely nothing to mask its real function. This is not a contemporary bathroom visit. There's no soft hum of pipes, no chilly seat, no possibility for pride. It's just you, your full bladder, and a household artifact that's witnessed more activity than the family treasure silverware. Victorian mornings are all about habit, and this is the opening dance. You slip on your robe, creep past groaning floorboards because the last thing you need is spectators, and execute a careful balancing act as you position yourself over the bowl. Solitude, a privilege for the wealthy or the incredibly swift. The rest of us are one poorly timed sneeze away from public humiliation. And here's the actual situation. Chamber vessels are not just for crises. They are the main answer for all nighttime requirements, and in many homes the standard for daytime matters too. If you're fortunate, you receive your own. If you're not, you're sharing with siblings, cousins, and possibly a distant aunt who just requires it for a moment. Yes, family unity comes in various forms. Once you've finished your business, there's no neat little lever to sweep your troubles away. No. You replace the cover with the care of someone disarming a bomb and slide it under the bed, where it will quietly steep for several more hours. Don't even consider bumping it with your feet. At some point, the household's appointed emptying individual, usually the lowest status member of the family, a servant. Or you, if you drew the unlucky lot, must embark on the holy ritual of removal. This is where the genuine drama starts. You grasp the chamber vessel at arm's distance, hoping for stability as you navigate tight staircases and packed hallways. Every step is an examination of core strength, fortune, and just how much you treasure your rug. Disposal itself is a choose-your-own adventure of terror. If you reside in the city, you empty the vessel into a larger household waste container, which will eventually be carried out and hurled, sometimes literally, into the street, joining a chorus of other waste contributions heading for the nearest open drain or gutter. Country living isn't much improved. The backyard waste pit is basically just a hole surrounded by hopeful rose plants and a cloud of historical bitterness. There are, naturally, manners rules for this process. In refined society, you're supposed to announce your plans with a warning call, something like Gardez l'eau, which is French for watch out for the water and actually means duck. Unfortunately, nobody ever ducks. and the outcome is an ongoing competition between street cleaners and airborne chamber vessel contents. The smell. Picture a mixture of ammonia, ancient mysteries, and a touch of despair. You quickly learn to breathe through your mouth, but the scent follows you back inside, sticking to your hands, your sleeves, your very essence. Soap exists, but hot water is scarce, and most people just wipe their hands on their apron and hope for the best. Modern plumbing at this point is an impossible dream, reserved for castles, mental institutions, or the extremely wealthy. For everyone else, the chamber vessel is the loyal companion that will never, ever abandon you. It's not glamorous, it's not dignified, and it's definitely not something you'll witness in a Jane Austen movie, but it's the Victorian method. Begin the day with a waltz around your own waist. Thank the household deities you made it to the window in time, and remind yourself, at least I didn't spill it. Because some days, victory isn't about conquering the globe. It's about not stumbling over a full chamber vessel at 6 in the morning, and that, in Victorian England, is about as satisfying as it gets. Before you can even consider breakfast, it's time for the refreshing ritual of splashing frozen water on your face, courtesy of a cracked basin and a cloth that hasn't seen soap since the Queen's wedding. You drag yourself across the creaking floorboards and approach the washstand, a wobbly little table that's witnessed more teeth chattering than polite society would ever confess. On top sits your porcelain basin, eternally half full of water that was poured the previous evening, and now seems to have acquired both a thin layer of dust and a certain philosophical chill. You know it's freezing because it's been sitting by the window, bravely collecting ambient Victorian frost, waiting for your unsuspecting cheeks. There's no tap, no hot spigot, and certainly no perfumed cleanser. The most you can hope for is a pitcher of water that hasn't frozen solid, and a washcloth that's technically clean, if you define clean as has been rinsed in the same basin water as everyone else. This is where you begin your daily struggle against dirt, sweat, and the slow accumulation of airborne London grime that settles on every available surface, including you. The ritual goes like this. Dip the cloth, squeeze it out, watching the grey water trickle back into the basin, and prepare yourself for contact. The first swipe is always a jolt, like being slapped by an iceberg. Your eyes water, your nose runs, and for a brief moment you question every choice that's brought you to this point. Victorian etiquette guides recommend washing your face, neck and hands at least once daily, enough to prevent complete social banishment, but not enough to stop you from slowly becoming one with your own grime. As you systematically scrub your face, you realise this is less of a beauty ritual and more of a survival technique. Every pore is on high alert, attempting to shrink away from the cold. The cloth itself, despite its cheerful embroidery, feels more like steel wool than a luxury spa towel. You can still sense yesterday's soap residue, which, if you're being honest, might actually be last week's. Victorian soap is made of lye and animal fat, leaving your skin both squeaky and slightly concerned. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the cloudy little mirror, a rosy-cheeked, slightly startled spirit hair already going crazy with humidity. And you're not alone in this. Every woman in the house is lined up behind you, each taking her turn at the communal splash zone. If you're the youngest, you get to go last, and your face-washing experience comes with the bonus round of floating hair, stray lint, and, if you're really unlucky, a speck of someone else's breakfast crumbs. Occasionally, a brave soul attempts a full wash, the dreaded sponge bath. You pull a heavy curtain across the room. Privacy is relative. Fill the basin with more icy water and do your best to wipe down the important areas before losing feeling in your limbs. Victorian wisdom claims that too much washing is actually harmful for you, opens the pores, lets in bad airs, and possibly reduces your moral strength. So you keep the sponge bath to a minimum, saving it for moments of true desperation or public embarrassment. What you never do, under any circumstances, is let the family hear you scream when the cold cloth hits your collarbone. The only thing worse than being cold and half awake is being cold. Half awake and the target of household mockery. When you're finally done, You pat your face with a towel that's somewhere between damp and outright suspicious, rearrange your hair as best you can, and count it a minor victory if your cheeks still have sensation. You glance at the basin, now a swirling tide pool of history, and wonder if you'll ever feel truly clean. You won't, not in this century, but you're awake, alert, and ready to face the day one icy splash at a time. And honestly, after that, breakfast could be anything and you'd still be grateful, even if it's cold oatmeal with a side of Victorian optimism. Toothpaste? Not exactly. Your oral hygiene choices include a mysterious powder that tastes like chalk and disappointment, and a toothbrush made from pig bristles that's basically a tiny Victorian torture device. You approach the washstand with the hopeful optimism of someone who's never met 19th century dental care. First, you pick up your toothbrush. Its less ergonomic marvel, and more splintered stick with attitude. The handle is hard wood, maybe bone if you're fancy, and the bristles real pig hair, because nothing says gentle like rubbing your gums with the hair of a moderately irritated swine. If you're unlucky, and most Victorians are, a few bristles are already falling out, lodging themselves in your molars or just lying in wait to surprise you later in the day. The toothpaste, such as it is, comes in the form of powder. There are a few homemade recipes: ground squid bone, chalk, charcoal, and, if you're feeling luxurious, a dash of baking soda. The flavour ranges from wet plaster to possible roofing material. You dampen the brush, dip it in the powder and brace yourself. The sensation is gritty, grainy, and about as pleasant as chewing pebbles. The taste? Imagine licking the floor of a limestone quarry that someone sprinkled with old mint. As you scrub, you notice the brush does a fantastic job of moving plaque around, but not so much removing it. Victorian oral hygiene advice recommends vigorous brushing, emphasis on vigorous. There are no gentle circular motions or soft for sensitive gums options, just you going to battle with a handful of pig hair and the faint hope that your teeth won't all fall out by your 30th birthday. The powder, while theoretically helpful, is also a gamble. Charcoal can stain your gums an elegant shade of grey. Chalk can leave behind a white residue so thick it looks like you're auditioning for a part as a haunted house decoration. And some of the more creative recipes include burnt bread crusts or ground-up clamshells, which double as exfoliation and a lesson in humility. There's no concept of floss either. The best you can do is pick at your teeth with the tip of a sewing needle or a sharpened piece of wood. If you're well off, you might have access to imported toothpicks made from fancy materials like ivory. For everyone else, it's the splinter and prayer method and the aftercare. Forget mouthwash. Some Victorians rinse with water, some with vinegar, and a few with brandy, which is less about hygiene and more about numbing the pain of Victorian existence. The result is a mouth that tingles, stings, and sometimes just gives up and goes numb. If your gums bleed, congratulations, you've joined the club. A little bleeding is considered normal, possibly even healthy. After all, it means the bristles are doing their job. If you're lucky enough to have a dentist in the neighbourhood, you avoid him at all costs. Dentistry in this era is performed by barbers or blacksmiths, and the tools look like they've been borrowed from a medieval torture museum. The go-to solution for tooth pain is extraction, performed without anaesthesia unless you count prayer and strong spirits. Fillings are a rarity, usually involving molten lead, and toothbrushes are used until they resemble a very determined hairbrush that lost its sense of purpose. But here's the thing. Everyone's breath smells like old stew and nervous hope. Bad breath is universal, like the common cold, and social customs are built around politely pretending not to notice you. Keep your mouth closed in polite company, speak softly, and rely on clove oil or mint leaves when things get dire. Kissing, if it happens, is an act of optimism more than romance. So you finish the ritual, spit out a chalky, greyish foam, and try to ignore the taste of defeat lingering on your tongue. Your teeth may be rough, your gums may be red, but you're ready to smile your way through another Victorian day, a little more grateful for modern toothpaste, and a lot more sympathetic to the dental struggles of your ancestors. Victorians considered washing hair more than once monthly the sign of a reckless spirit. If you're feeling brave, you'll crack an egg in a bowl, sprinkle in a little gin and pray your hair doesn't turn into breakfast. You wake up, scratch your scalp, and try to remember the last time your hair was genuinely wet. For the Victorian woman, hair washing is not a casual activity. It's an ordeal, a ritual and a minor scandal all at once. If you so much as suggest washing your hair twice in 1 week, older relatives look at you as if you've announced plans to run away with the local chimney sweep. The very idea flirts with madness. Your hair care routine starts with a brush, a sturdy wooden paddle with bristles that could double as a medieval defense system. You brush and brush and brush, sending clouds of dust, lint, and the faintest hint of yesterday's supper flying into the sunlight. The goal is to redistribute your natural oils because in the absence of shampoo, your body's own grease is considered both a styling product and a sort of makeshift hair armour. But eventually the time comes. Maybe it's the full moon, maybe it's a particularly juicy piece of gossip. But you decide today is the day. The great washing. You gather your supplies. A cracked bowl, a single egg, a splash of gin if you're lucky, or maybe some rainwater that you've painstakingly collected because hard tap water is considered ruinous. You mix these together, and what you've made is less a beauty concoction and more a breakfast experiment gone rogue. You kneel by the washstand or, for the daring, the kitchen sink, and work the mixture through your hair. The egg whites slide down the back of your neck, the gin stings your scalp, and you have to resist the urge to make a meringue joke. For conditioning, some women use vinegar, or, if feeling flush, a few drops of scented oil. The resulting smell is a complex blend of just baked, maybe pickled, and definitely Victorian. The rinse is a test of patience. Warm water is a luxury, so you make do with cold, pouring it over your head as quickly as possible, before the chill makes you lose sensation in your ears. If you're lucky enough to have a helper, they pour with the enthusiasm of someone trying to win a competition. If you're alone, you just grit your teeth and hope not to drown in your own kitchen. There's no hairdryer, of course. You wrap your hair in a towel, secure it with a pin, and sit by the fire for an hour or two. If the weather's bad, your hair might stay damp until bedtime, leading to a whole host of warnings about catching a chill, summoning a ghost, or just wasting away. Damp hair, like many other things, is considered morally suspect. If your hair is particularly stubborn, you might resort to dry shampoo, a dusting of rice flour, starch, or even a little talcum powder. The idea is to soak up excess oil and add a matte finish. In practice, you're left with hair that looks and smells like a well-flowered baking project, and a collar dusted with what could be either dandruff or pastry crumbs. Of course, between washings, you do your best to maintain an illusion of freshness. Scarves and bonnets are more than fashion statements. They're strategic cover-ups. You change your hair ribbons, rebraid, and hope for the best. If things get desperate, you can always fake a windswept look and blame the weather. Despite all this, Victorian hair is often thick, shiny, and impressively long. This is less about good genes and more about necessity. Cutting hair short is reserved for illness, mourning, or the truly avant-garde. So you soldier on, grateful for hairpins, hats, and the steadfast refusal of everyone around you to acknowledge the situation. Congratulations! Your hair is clean, you're only mildly chilled, and you've survived another round of the great Victorian hair adventures. The next time someone complains about shampoo commercials, just remind them it could always be egg and gin. Nothing says feminine mystique like sweating through 4 layers of fabric and a corset that leaves you light-headed and lightly pickled in your own juices. Corsets are the Victorian answer to every problem. Want an hourglass figure? Corset. Need to discourage slouching? Corset. Feeling faint and want a built-in excuse? You guessed it. Corset. The logic is simple. If you can't breathe, you can't gossip too loudly. And that's practically a moral victory in any drawing room. Your day begins with the ceremonial wrangling of the undergarments. Step 1. The chemise. A linen shift that offers all the privacy of tissue paper and soaks up the first wave of sweat. Stockings tied with ribbons that dig into your thighs just enough to remind you you're alive. Petticoats. And because the air feels too breathable, another petticoat. Finally, the masterpiece. The corset made of tightly woven fabric and whalebone. Or, if your budget-conscious steel stays that clang like a dinner bell every time you move, you stand in front of your maid, arms up, and brace yourself. The laces are pulled, the air is squeezed from your lungs, and you do your best impression of a respectable sausage. Every exhale is an act of faith. "Tighter, miss?" the maid asks, already knotting with the fervour of someone paid by the inch. You want to say no, but words require oxygen, and that's in short supply. A good corset gives you the coveted wasp waist, which is less about beauty and more about internal organ origami. You learn to breathe shallowly, speak softly, and move with the precision of a chess piece. Bending at the waist is out of the question, so you develop a graceful full-body squat to pick up dropped handkerchiefs or, more likely, retrieve your pride from the floor. But then the sweating begins. Victorians may have loved modesty, but their bodies had other plans. All those layers create a microclimate under your dress, a tropical ecosystem fed by nerves, exertion, and the daily panic of being late to breakfast. Summer is the worst. By noon, your chemise is soaked, your corset smells faintly of defeat, and you're one stiff breeze away from total collapse. Let's not even get started on what happens if you're emotional. Did you just hear a scandalous rumour? That racing heart isn't helping your airflow. Laugh too hard and you risk a delicate turn. Public fainting is an occupational hazard, and any good parlour is equipped with at least one fainting couch, just in case the combined force of lace, heat, and the neighbour's gossip sends you careening into Victorian oblivion. To make things even spicier, corsets are not washed frequently. You spot clean with vinegar and hope for the best. Over time, they develop a subtle, lived-in scent, a blend of body odour, soap, old perfume, and the kind of historical sweat that could probably tell your fortune if it tried. There's no deodorant strong enough for what's going on under there. Powdered underarms and handkerchiefs tucked into cleavage are the closest thing to personal air conditioning, and yet you're expected to look flawless. Hair in place, skin glowing but not sweating. Posture upright, you can't slouch, so you project confidence. You can't really breathe, so you speak in gentle tones. Picture this, Victorian ASMR, if you can imagine it. Dining becomes a dangerous game. One additional spoonful of dessert, and suddenly your corset is plotting rebellion. When nightfall arrives and you finally release those strings, the relief is overwhelming. You can breathe deeply, bend forward and briefly consider escaping to join the carnival anywhere with more forgiving clothing requirements. You strip away the corset and examine the aftermath. Crimson welts, perhaps a bruise or three, and a feeling of accomplishment that you survived another day without fainting in the flower garden. Victorian style may be graceful, but it demands payment, calculated in perspiration, measurements and minor triumphs over your own chest cavity. You rest in bed, blissfully unconstrained, questioning whether anyone in tomorrow's world will believe you chose this torture voluntarily. They won't, and they'll be absolutely correct. Let's discuss drawers, not the furniture variety, but the undergarments you wear if fortune smiles upon you. Most ladies simply depend on petticoats, creating a direct connection between you and history's most suffocating seating arrangements. Welcome to the lower realm of Victorian creativity, a domain governed by uncertainty, cold air, and a profound, unmentioned terror of skin irritation. If you envision Victorian undergarments as a delicate, lace-adorned paradise of frilly bloomers, prepare for disappointment, because throughout much of this period, drawers were more desired fantasy than actual reality. For an astounding portion of the century, ladies simply wore no undergarments whatsoever. The reasoning was sensible. Why include another layer when you're already sporting four? Additionally, in an era where restrooms were rare and solitude even rarer, fewer fasteners meant fewer catastrophes. So, what stands between you and that rigid, polished wooden seat in Cousin Margaret's sitting room? Layers. Countless layers. First arrives the shift, a plain, lightweight undergarment often crafted from rough linen, designed to soak up your daily moisture and prevent your finer outer garments from disintegrating under stress. Over the shift, you stack petticoats, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes so numerous you forget the count. They function as insulation, propriety barriers, protection, and, frankly, Victorian climate control in the most dreadful manner possible. If you're among the fortunate minority, you might own split drawers. These aren't your contemporary practical briefs. They're baggy, knee-length and separated at the crotch. Correct, separated. It's called decency, but the construction focuses entirely on convenience for toilet visits. In an era where buttons, clasps, and yards of fabric separate you from the chamber vessel, you haven't truly experienced life until you've attempted to maneuver a complete petticoat arrangement in a frigid breeze, while simultaneously hoping you don't tumble in. The fabrics aren't cooperative. Cotton remains scarce and costly. Linen, though breathable, begins rigid and only becomes soft after years of scrubbing and mending. Wool, conversely, feels like punishment for previous wrongdoings. Scratchy, weighty, and somehow perpetually slightly moist in winter, these layers might be your sole defense against freezing. In summer, they're an open invitation to fungal infections, heat rash, and the kind of perspiration irritation that motivates verse. And if you believed laundry would rescue you, reconsider. Washing undergarments is an enormous undertaking, particularly since propriety demands you never exhibit unmentionables publicly. So you hand wash your shift in secrecy, hoping the neighbours don't notice it drying and begin spreading gossip about your moral deterioration. Persistent stains are battled with lye, soap and a brush that suspiciously resembles something you'd use to groom livestock. If the material survives, you consider it successful. Let's not overlook the dangers of petticoat control. Multiple layers transform simple activities like sitting, rising or breathing into daily adventures. Climbing stairs, you bunch your skirts with both hands, exposing the absolute minimum of ankle. Unless you're feeling genuinely rebellious, an unexpected wind gust can convert you into a tragic, overstuffed sailing vessel flailing for respectability. And still, despite everything, society demands you appear calm, fragile and completely unaware of the heat rash on your legs. You cannot discuss what's occurring beneath your skirts. You cannot acknowledge sticking to every surface you encounter. You simply smile, float, and pray nobody detects the faint outline of last season's patched shift beneath your gown. Undergarments are meant to be invisible, both physically and socially, but for the Victorian lady, it's a daily struggle, a contest of layers and laundry, secrecy and endurance. By evening's end, you remove it all one sticky, scratchy layer at a time, wondering if anyone in the future will believe. You wore 5 skirts to supper and sometimes absolutely nothing beneath them, and somewhere in the soft, temporary comfort of your freshly washed shift. You recall this is history's concept of modesty, and it's as airy or as stifling as you choose to make it. Laundry isn't merely a task, it's physical exercise. Scrubbing petticoats in lye, wringing them out with frozen hands and praying the neighbours aren't critiquing your soap methodology. Spoiler, they definitely are. If you consider laundry a modern nuisance, a mountain of machine-washable shirts awaiting their day of judgment, Victorian laundry will make you embrace your spin cycle and whisper gratitude to your washing machine. In this reality, laundry day appears not weekly, but every 2 weeks, sometimes even monthly. If you've been postponing your duties, and honestly, who wouldn't? The accumulation is legendary. By the time you're prepared to address it, your laundry mountain has the bulk and awareness of a small, damp beast. The day starts early, not 8 a.m. early, but before sunrise appears and the frost is still conspiring against you. Early, you drag linens, shifts, petticoats, and anything else that can't escape on its own into a tub that's witnessed more stains than a medieval battleground. The primary ingredient is water, occasionally hot if you have firewood to waste. Otherwise as cold as Victorian mercy. Soap isn't the mild flower-scented bar you select at the market. No, you're using a chunk of homemade lye soap so brutal it could probably remove paint. The lye burns your hands, and even with a washboard for assistance, you quickly discover that laundry is as much about raw power as it is about cleanliness. If your hands aren't chapped by the second shift, you're not performing correctly. There's a method to the chaos, and every lady has her own secret formula for stain elimination: salt for wine, vinegar for grass, hope and denial for everything else. If the stains won't disappear, you simply patch over them or designate the item for daily wear. Nobody expects perfection, just visible effort and the absence of barnyard smells. Rinsing is another epic. You immerse garments into cold, clean water, working out the soap with endless swirls and squeezes. If you're fortunate, you receive help. If not, your arm muscles develop at double the rate of any gentleman in the household. Wringing out heavy, soaked linen is not for the weak-hearted. It's a trial of determination, strength, and how much you treasure dry sleeves. But your ordeal doesn't conclude with wringing. Now arrives the hanging. There are no dryers, just ropes stretched across the yard lines, sagging under the weight of collective family grime. Your neighbours observe from behind their curtains, silently evaluating your hanging methodology. Is your shift too near the petticoats? Did you pin from the seams or the hem? Did you showcase the fine linens? Or, heaven forbid, let the world witness your patched undergarments? Victorian laundry is a viewing sport, and the criticism is ruthless. Then there's the climate, a fickle, ever-present menace. If it's bright, you rush to hang everything before the storm clouds arrive. If it pours, you drag it all down, only to hang it up again indoors, transforming your house into a steamy, slightly mouldy obstacle course. God help you if a bird gets creative on your clean laundry, or the neighbour's cat decides your finest petticoat is the perfect sleeping spot. Once everything is finally dry, you're still not finished. Enter the iron, a hefty wedge of cast iron that must be heated over the flame and wielded with both bravery and calloused hands. Ironing is slow, hot, and somewhat dangerous. The risk of burning your best shift is ever present. So is the fear of scorched fingers. If you succeed, your linens are crisp and respectable. If you fail, well, ruffles conceal a multitude of mistakes. By laundry day's end, you've perspired, scrubbed, and suffered for your cleanliness. Your hands are wrinkled, your back hurts, and you vow you'll never wear white again. But as you survey your line of fluttering, sun-bleached clothes, you feel a brief sense of victory. Laundry Victorian style is both punishment and proof of survival. And as you collapse into your finally clean sheets that night, you whisper a quiet, exhausted thanks to the laundry gods and a promise that next time you'll just wear everything twice. Or maybe 3 times. Who's tracking? Deodorant? Not in this century. The best you can manage is dabbing your armpits with vinegar, lavender water, or just the hope that nobody stands downwind. Welcome to the wild, wild west of Victorian cleanliness. The armpit, a territory where science, desperation, and creative optimism crash together. In this period, personal odour isn't so much a problem to be resolved as it is a natural characteristic of daily existence, like weather or pigeons. Sure, you prefer to smell pleasant, but unless you're wealthy enough to bathe daily, spoiler you're not, you simply do your best to mask, distract, or completely ignore whatever's happening beneath your sleeves. It begins each morning as you raise your arms, stretch, and immediately regret it. That musty, sour aroma that's you, a handcrafted blend of wool, human essence, and 3-day-old anxiety. The science of perspiration is a puzzle. Victorian authorities claim that sweating purifies the blood. And some even believe that blocking up the pores is a recipe for catastrophe. Because obviously what your body requires most is to ventilate itself. So what's a lady to do? First, you turn to the arsenal of home remedies. There's the vinegar. splash a little on your armpits, and pray that it outperforms the natural bouquet. The result is something reminiscent of salad dressing abandoned in the sun. If you're fortunate enough to have lavender water, you'll drench yourself with abandon, temporarily replacing armpit with aggressive grandmother's linen closet. Sometimes you even combine the two for a mixture that confuses the nose and stuns the senses. Is it floral? Is it acidic? Is it time to go stand near the window and hope for a strong breeze? Other home remedies proliferate. Talcum powder is a favourite for the well-off dust under the arms to absorb moisture and leave a faint powdery trail wherever you go. Just hope you're not wearing black unless you want to spend the day looking like you lost a battle with a pastry chef. Some ladies resort to rubbing their armpits with lemon rinds, not so much for effectiveness as for the optimistic belief that citrus is nature's solution to everything. It is not. What you never do, under any circumstances, is raise your arms in public. Victorian social protocol has a way of suppressing even the slightest hint of movement that might unleash the monster beneath your sleeves. You practice the art of the delicate gesture, gracefully waving your fan with elbows glued to your waist and hands arched in careful choreography. Should you be called upon to reach a high shelf, you simply faint instead. It's safer. Men have it just as badly, perhaps worse. Their version of deodorant is a quick rub down with a bit of whiskey or cologne, followed by layers of shirt, vest, jacket, and social denial. If anyone comments on the room's stuffiness, you all agree it must be the weather, the coal smoke, or the dog. The real challenge arrives in summer, when the temperature rises. Layers become a form of personal torture, and the population's collective odour climbs to a level that can only be described as historically significant. At parties, open windows and bundles of dried herbs are deployed as makeshift air fresheners. If you're lucky, the room is so thick with perfume and pomanders that nobody notices the true source of the miasma. And let's not forget laundry, or the lack thereof. Underclothes are washed when you have the energy and privacy, but for the most part, you simply air them out on the line and call it a day. The result? By midweek, your armpits are staging a quiet rebellion, one whiff at a time. Still, everyone is in the same aromatic boat. The collective effort is one of polite endurance, carefully ignoring what cannot be fixed. You go about your day, powder in pocket, lavender sprig at the ready, and the firm hope that history will be kind, or at least upwind. So the next time you lift your arms in a crisp modern t-shirt and marvel at the absence of odour, spare a thought for your Victorian sisters. They faced the untamed frontier with courage, creativity, and enough vinegar to pickle a city block. And that, truly, is the scent of resilience. Want to look like a porcelain doll? Excellent. Just slather your face in lead powder and arsenic and try not to die before the next garden party. The Victorian beauty routine isn't just a regimen, it's a high-stakes gamble with your long-term health, sanity, and the hope that nobody notices your skin flaking off at afternoon tea. In this world, pale is power. A ghostly white complexion means you're delicate, refined, and most importantly, not someone who labours outdoors with the working classes. Naturally, achieving this spectral glow means using anything and everything regardless of what it does to your insides. You begin with your base Venetian ceruse, a classic blend of white lead and vinegar. The instructions say apply gently, but there's no such thing as subtlety here. You cake it on with fingers or a small cloth, watching as your face is slowly transformed into something between a marble statue and an undercooked pastry. The powder settles into every line and wrinkle, highlighting not your natural beauty, but every patch of dry skin you acquired from a lifetime of Victorian climate. But why stop at lead? That just gets you started. For a really luminous finish, it's time for a dusting of arsenic powder. Yes, that arsenic. The kind that eliminates rats and disappoints mystery novelists by being far too obvious. Sold in elegant little containers, arsenic complexion wafers promise to brighten the skin, banish blemishes, and lend the wearer an otherworldly radiance. What they actually do is gently poison you one glowing cheek at a time. Blush, if you dare, comes from crushed beetles or cochineal. Exotic if you can afford it, cabbage-based if you can't. Apply just enough to mimic the effect of a mild fever, but not so much that people suspect you've been running. Lip colour is more art than science. Some ladies rub their mouths with rose petals, while others dab on homemade concoctions of mercuric sulfide for a truly kiss of death look. Side effects include numb lips, swollen gums, and a tendency to drool during heartfelt conversations. Eyebrows and lashes present their own set of hazards. Want them darker? Mix lamp black soot with a little saliva and paint it on using a bone-handled brush. The result is dramatic, and after a long day, smudges in a way that would make a raccoon envious. If you want to really shine at the evening ball, you can sprinkle on a bit of powdered pearl. Or for the truly daring, just rub a slice of raw potato across your face and hope for the best. The trouble, of course, is that these beauty products have consequences. Regular lead application turns the skin grey, causes muscle tremors and gives you a lovely set of headaches. Long-term users are rewarded with hair loss, chronic vomiting, and that all-important ethereal look. Ethereal because you're basically halfway to ghosthood. Arsenic offers a similar package with the added bonus of internal bleeding. Still, the pressure to look perfect is relentless. Magazines praise the porcelain skin of society's elite and whisper darkly about ladies who appear too rosy or worse, sun-kissed. The cult of the complexion is so powerful that some ladies avoid sunlight entirely, hiding under veils and hats or even sewing extra ruffles into their bonnets to block harmful rays. That's right, sun protection. Victorian style is more wear your curtains outside than just apply sunscreen. And yet, through it all, there's a strange camaraderie among ladies. You swap recipes, trade secrets, and commiserate over the burns, rashes, and unpredictable side effects. If your face peels, you simply declare it's from a new French exfoliation method. If your lips swell, you're not dying, you're avant-garde. So next time you see a portrait of a Victorian lady looking flawless, remember she didn't just wake up like that. She risked her health, sanity, and reputation, all for a complexion so pure it might actually be toxic. Beauty may be pain, but in the Victorian era, it's also a slow, stylish game of Russian roulette. It's bath day. The whole household lines up to share a single tub of tepid water. You go last, and the water now contains traces of every family member and possibly a visiting dog. In the Victorian home, bathing isn't a daily pleasure. It's an event that takes planning, physical endurance, and a strong stomach. There's no hot and cold tap, no steam, and certainly no fluffy towel waiting on a chrome rack. Instead, there's a big tin tub that spends most of its life hanging on a hook in the pantry, waiting for its bi-weekly moment in the sun, or more often, the rain-soaked shadows. Preparation for bath day is a family production. Water must be fetched bucket by bucket from the nearest well pump or kitchen kettle, then heated on the stovetop by laborious pot. This is a workout that burns enough calories to justify skipping the bath entirely. By the time the tub is filled, the water is lukewarm at best, cloudy at worst, and almost certainly haunted by the ghosts of potatoes boiled earlier that day. The order of bathing is dictated by strict rules, unspoken rules. The man of the house goes first, then the children, in descending order of perceived importance. Then the ladies, and finally the unfortunate souls who drew the shortest straw. If you're last. The water is a complex stew, skin flakes, soap residue, a stray hair or three, and that peculiar oily sheen that no amount of scrubbing ever removes. Somewhere in the middle, a family dog might leap in, splash about, and ensure the water now has just a touch of wet fur. For the full Victorian spa experience, personal modesty and privacy are optional. The bathing tub is plonked in the kitchen or by the fireplace, and the only privacy screen is a half-hearted curtain or a politely averted gaze. You keep your shift on if anyone's watching, which means bathing is less about getting clean and more about soaking your clothes and hoping for the best. Soap is precious and rationed, homemade from animal fat and lye. It stings your skin, leaves a film, and smells somewhere between barnyard and medicinal regret. If you want something fancier, you might toss in a handful of herbs or some lavender water, assuming you don't mind smelling like a grandmother's wardrobe for a week. The wealthy can afford to bathe more often, sometimes even in private claw-footed tubs with real hot water. But for the rest, the event is a comedy of errors. The whole ordeal takes hours, and by the time you're done, you're exhausted, damp, and still not entirely convinced you're clean. And bathing too often is considered suspicious, even dangerous. Medical advice of the time warns that excessive washing opens the pores and lets in disease, so your weekly grime becomes a sort of protective barrier. Cleanliness is next to godliness, they say, but only if godliness is achieved in tepid water already used by half the congregation. When you finally climb out, shivering, you dry off with a towel that has itself been through several rounds of bi-weekly laundry. Your skin tingles from the lye, your hair clings in clumps, and there's always the nagging sense you missed a spot, possibly an entire limb. You wrap yourself in a fresh shift, determined not to think about what just happened. You survived bath day, and that's what counts. And so the tub is emptied, usually out the back door, where it quickly seeps into the garden, leaving the roses wondering what they did to deserve such a fate. The tub is scrubbed, dried, and rehung, a silent witness to the week's accumulated sins. You go to bed that night with the faintest whiff of lavender, the distant memory of warmth, and the absolute certainty that you will put off the next bath for as long as humanly possible. After all, in Victorian America, being too clean is almost as suspicious as being too dirty. So you settle into your sheets, grateful for the tiny victory of making it through another once-in-a-fortnight festival. And if you're wise, you sleep with the window cracked just in case the tub tries to haunt you in your dreams. The Victorian answer to stench. Douse yourself in enough rose water or musk that your very existence becomes a form of chemical warfare. Welcome to the battlefield of the senses, where the nose is the first casualty. In a world where bathing is an Olympic event and laundry is a semi-annual panic, the only reasonable option left is to try and out-scent your own humanity. And so every Victorian lady arms herself with the era's most potent weapon. Perfume. Not a delicate spritz, but a full-scale olfactory assault. The day begins with the ritualistic uncorking of bottles and vials from the vanity. There's rosewater, orange blossom, bergamot, patchouli, and if you're feeling especially dramatic, musk that would stun a moose. These aren't your department store perfumes with notes of ocean breeze and undertones of joy. No, these are concoctions so strong that a single dab can clear a room, summon a Victorian ghost, and possibly cure the common cold through sheer force of aroma. The application is both science and strategy. You dab scent behind your ears, on your wrists, up your sleeves, and crucially, down the cleavage. If you're a real professional, you soak your handkerchief in perfume and keep it ready for any unpleasant encounters, public toilets, or sudden attacks by your uncle's pipe smoke. It's not just about smelling nice. It's about creating a portable force field between yourself and the rest of humanity. The goal is not subtlety. The goal is survival. You are masking the impossible. The scent of unwashed bodies, chamber pots, boiled cabbage, coal smoke, and last week's socks. If a single bottle of perfume happens to fall and shatter on your dresser, well, now your entire home smells like a Victorian florist. Exploring the only downside is you can never be entirely sure if you've overdone it, because your sense of smell has long since waved a white flag. Victorian perfumers are artists and chemists. Certain fragrances emerge from genuine blossoms gathered at sunrise, then steeped and crushed and refined until their pure spirit endures. Others depend on creature byproducts. Musk from a feline species, whale secretions from marine mammal intestines, and glandular extracts thanks to dam builders. Everything blended into premium scents. If contemporary aromas seem intricate, imagine coexisting with bowel essence. The genuine sorcery lies in everyone surrounding you practicing identical behaviour. Visit any packed event, chapel, playhouse, or exceptionally spirited burial service, and you'll encounter a tsunami of competing aromas, each battling for supremacy. The outcome resembles less springtime garden and more botanical shop riot. Inhaling deeply in these settings isn't advisable. Consequences might involve lightheadedness, streaming eyes, and the feeling you're being softly smothered by a flowery cushion. For working folks, fragrance represents more aspiration than routine. They depend instead on homemade lavender liquid, a rosemary sprig positioned near the ear, or during truly dire circumstances, a touch of menthol, which handily repels both insects and romantic prospects. Nevertheless, just a subtle trace of rose essence can provide sophisticated flair, concealing at minimum the worst of existence's aromatic embarrassments. The scent isn't merely for yourself, it's for your surroundings as well. Victorian dwellings stink of moist masonry, kerosene and soggy hound, so you ignite incense, distribute dried flowers and suspend spiced oranges from bed frames. When wealthy, you can purchase aromatic wax lights which amount to animal fat with pretentious ambitions. The final outcome? Your residence smells like a plant scientist's luggage, and you question why your songbird appears suddenly sluggish. Come day's end, you remain uncertain whether you've attained sophistication or simply transformed into a walking room deodorizer. Regardless, you're prepared to confront society confidently, a pocket brimming with scented tissues and the understanding that should history recall anything regarding you, it's your valiant attempt to disguise the undoable. When everything else disappoints, you can always attribute the odour to the folks next door. Indeed, in Victorian Britain, modest self-deception, like modest perfume, extends tremendously far. Flawless skin remains the aspiration, yet the typical blade is a blunt edge inherited from your grandmother. Hair removal happens by flame light, and shrieks aren't unusual. For the Victorian lady, personal maintenance is less gentle self-pampering ceremony and more dangerous expedition. Regarding appearance, the goal is pristine ceramic skin, an appearance suggesting prosperity, and I've never laboured outdoors. Regrettably, available implements are roughly as sophisticated as farm equipment and doubly prone to causing injury. Let's begin with the blade. No pastel safety shavers exist here. You receive instead a weighty, menacing, straight razor with a grip that's either bone, timber, or, if truly cursed, corroded iron. This relic has probably belonged to the bloodline longer than the actual bloodline, and it's been honed so frequently it now looks like a slicing knife with confidence problems. The edge, naturally, is never quite as keen as you'd desire. It catches, it jumps, it cuts. With each stroke, you're hoping you won't appear in tomorrow's scandal sheet as a warning story. Shaving foam? You dream the finest you can manage is a soap bar and hope it won't burn excessively. Work up lather, calm your courage, and start. Privacy doesn't exist. You're probably crouched over a wash basin in the kitchen or, if fortunate, in a frigid washroom where your own cursing echoes off the walls. You proceed cautiously, attempting not to consider the absence of medical supplies in the dwelling, and upon completion, your skin is either pleasingly smooth or a quilt of minor, stinging wounds. Congratulations! You've survived another episode of Victorian lady or novice surgeon for smaller tasks. Eyebrows, the random chin whisker, or that single rebellious upper lip hair. There's plucking. This occurs with a tool so basic it could have been created in a cavern. The tweezers are dull, the illumination is poor, and your composure is already shattered from the razor. You lean as near as possible to the looking glass, squinting, and take aim. Each removed hair comes with a sharp, pinching ache and the constant dread that your mother will enter at precisely the instant you're creating the most grotesque expression imaginable. Hot wax isn't available unless you consider honey and cloth strips, which resembles more ancient punishment than contemporary beauty treatment. Some ladies experiment with hair-dissolving powders, most being little beyond bleach and shattered hopes. The outcomes are unpredictable. Best scenario, a mild irritation. Worst scenario, you must avoid polite company until your eyebrows regrow. Naturally, there are those who simply allow nature to proceed. Victorian style supports your cause. High necklines, extended sleeves, hand coverings, and a generous helping of underskirts. With clever ribbon work and calculated positioning, you can pass months without anyone suspecting you overlooked a spot. Hair elimination is, in certain circles, deemed optional, even defiant. Who's going to inspect? The genuine horror, however, is social. Gossip circulates like smokestack fumes. If you're spotted with some fuzz, murmurs start. Is she neglecting herself? Is she concealing a controversy? Did she, heaven help us, forget to pluck before services? Conversely, excessive grooming raises its own questions too. Overplucked and you're labelled as loose, conceited or French, which, depending on the district, might be the most serious accusation possible. At the conclusion of everything, you splash your face with cold water, apply a drop of lavender essence to mask the smell of blood and terror, and emerge from the trial mostly whole, somewhat red, and more thankful than ever for high collars. You might not have reached true smoothness, but you've endured another round of Victorian grooming gambling. So next time you grab your multi-blade aloe-enhanced razor in a completely tiled, brilliantly lit bathroom, remember your forebears cleared the path with dull blades, candle-lit plucking, and the occasional cry heard halfway down the block. If that doesn't encourage you to value modern grooming, nothing will if you're bold enough to venture outside. Public restrooms are infamous for being social meeting places for germs, rodents, and philosophical despair. Welcome to the less celebrated aspect of Victorian civilization. The public privy. In theory, it's a worthy concept. Supply the busy metropolis with a location for fundamental human requirements. In reality, it's an architectural tribute to fear and a daily wager with your respectability. If you discover yourself away from home, distant from your cherished chamber pot and desperately requiring relief, brace yourself for an encounter that equally challenges survival, tests endurance, and experiments socially. Victorian public facilities, if you can label them that, arrive in multiple terrifying varieties. Some are fee-based timber stalls, dangerously positioned over open waste pits or in truly unfortunate areas, the waterway itself. Others are merely privacy barriers around a shared ditch, strategically located at the settlement's edge, near enough to smell, distant enough to deny accountability. The modern conveniences, introduced following the Great Odour of 1858, feature rows of compartments with iron doors and stone seats. On paper, it sounds luxurious. In practice, it's simply a fancier venue for identical old miseries. Entering, you're welcomed by an overpowering fragrance, cleaning solution, mould, stagnant air, and the lingering memory of every previous visitor. The audio landscape is a symphony of trickling liquid, scratching vermin, and the echo of shifting feet from the adjacent booth. You hope for a clean surface, but your expectations are crushed. Victorian facilities are seldom, if ever, sanitised. Instead, they're occasionally dusted with lime or ash in a half-hearted gesture toward cleanliness. It's less hygiene and more aromatic disguise. Then arrive the rats, the unwelcome visitors. Every Victorian metropolis houses an army of rodents, and public facilities are their personal arena. You hear a soft squeak, feel a brush on your shoe, and suddenly you're performing an impromptu Celtic dance in full dress, praying nobody else witnessed. If you manage to dodge the wildlife, you must still handle the plumbing or absence of it. Flushing facilities are a city privilege, and most locations still require the traditional bucket and pour approach, meaning you may encounter the previous user's contribution. Privacy is a cruel jest. The partitions are thin, the latches are optional, and there's always someone lurking nearby, awaiting their opportunity. Or worse, eager to begin a chat. Victorian manners don't entirely address the complexities of public restroom conversation, but that doesn't prevent anyone from attempting. Social fear is included in the experience. Heaven forbid you're identified, the rumour potential is limitless. Did you observe Mrs. Thompson at the public facility? She remained inside forever. If particularly unfortunate, you might encounter a neighbour or terror of terrors, your mother-in-law. Resources are scarce. Bathroom tissue as we understand it is years away. You make do with newspaper squares, leaves, or, if you're financially comfortable, sheets of specially produced toilet paper so coarse it could serve as sandpaper. For everyone else, it's whatever's available, and hope you won't regret it afterward. Cleanliness is a mental state. Departing is its own challenge. You exit, careful not to contact anything, attempting to appear as dignified as someone who's just battled history's worst odours can possibly seem. If you brought a scented handkerchief, now's the moment to use it. Hold it delicately to your nose and pretend you're experiencing a dizzy spell. Nobody will question it. Everyone else is doing likewise. By the time you return to the street's safety, you're a transformed individual, a bit humbler, a bit more scarred, and much more grateful for indoor plumbing. You walk quicker, breathe deeply, and promise never to leave home again without a completely empty bladder and at least 3 emergency handkerchiefs. Thus, the legend of Victorian public facilities continues. A place where germs, rats, and existential dread reign supreme, and even the bravest souls emerge with renewed respect for home's comforts. If you survived, congratulations. You're prepared for anything, even afternoon tea at your in-laws. Victorian hairbrushes aren't washed, they are preserved, meaning you brush yesterday's grease back into your scalp, along with every loose strand you've ever shed. It's morning, and you sit before your dressing table, staring down at your trusted hairbrush, an heirloom passed from mother to daughter, possibly since time began. Its wooden handle is worn smooth from generations of use, and its bristles, boar or horsehair if fortunate, are packed so densely they could serve as a weapon when needed. But what hides between those bristles? Mysteries. Dark, greasy, historical mysteries. The Victorian method of hair care is deeply devoted to 2 principles: daily brushing and the complete avoidance of actually washing the brush. This is partially practical. Brushes are costly and the materials aren't always waterproof. Mainly though, it's simply customary. Each morning you give your hair 100 strokes, as directed by every beauty guide of the era. The concept is to redistribute the natural oils from scalp to ends, achieving that healthy gleam that's less salon fresh and more buttered turnip. You brush, and the bristles slide through your hair with the comforting creak of aged wood and a soft whisper of Victorian mysteries. But every stroke accomplishes more than just styling. It gathers. The brush is a sponge for the debris of daily existence: dust, carbon from gas flames, stray soap flakes, and the constant shower of your own shedding. Not to mention the oils, perspiration, and occasional remnants of last week's egg and liquor shampoo attempt. Over time, the bristles become a tangled greyish web. Part hair, part fuzz, part existential alarm. Washing the brush is theoretically possible. In practice, it's a monthly ceremony at best, and one approached with reluctance. You pry loose the surface layer of hair, carefully weaving it into a tiny sphere because in true Victorian tradition, discarded hair is never wasted. It's saved to fill pincushions, craft hair accessories, or feed the spirit that lives beneath the staircase. Anything remaining is simply pushed deeper into the bristles with a few more firm strokes. If you're feeling particularly righteous, you might swish the brush in a bowl of cold water and vinegar, then leave it to dry on a bright windowsill. The result? A slightly moist brush that now smells faintly of dressing. But mostly you just continue on. The brush is always prepared for service, regardless of its condition. Each morning and evening you take your place, section your hair with the sacred comb, also never washed, and begin the ceremony again. The brushing is accompanied by casual conversation, sighs, and the occasional cry when a particularly stubborn tangle attempts to defeat you. The oils from your scalp are worked through every strand, giving your hair that signature Victorian sheen, a look that modern hair commercials would describe as radiant if they were feeling courageous. The problem, naturally, is that all those oils, combined with weeks' worth of debris, do possess an aroma. Not a pleasant one, somewhere between old library, storage chest, and just a touch of last Thursday's meal. The smell isn't overpowering, but it's present, and you live in quiet denial, confident that your rosewater perfume will overcome any offensive strand. If anyone does remark, you simply declare it's the natural scent of healthy hair, as endorsed by Queen Victoria herself. On special occasions you might adorn your locks with ribbons or flowers. Never mind that they too will end up matted with oil and dust by nightfall. Hairpins, combs, and the ever-present bonnet are your constant companions in the battle for respectability. You might spend half your waking hours maintaining your hair, but washing the tools? That's a step too far. By the week's end, your brush is more relic than accessory, a museum of every strand, secret and accident from your Victorian existence. Still, you wouldn't exchange it for anything. It's familiar, dependable, and just a little bit haunted. So you place your brush back on the vanity, content. Tomorrow it will be there again, ready for another session. And if it ever truly revolts, you know exactly what to do. Pretend not to notice. Tie on a fresh ribbon and keep brushing. Because in the Victorian age, denial isn't just a river in Egypt. It's a crucial part of your hair care regimen. 5 layers of skirt may appear elegant, but they capture heat, moisture, and more than a few small forest creatures. A summer walk becomes a walking petri dish. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer engineering involved in Victorian women's clothing. Forget simple and done. Every day begins with an ambitious stack of underlayers. Chemise, corset, cover, at least 2 petticoats, but 5 is perfect. And then finally, your skirt, which by comparison feels almost freeing. This complex system isn't about comfort or practicality. It's about propriety, volume, and, in some cruel twist of destiny, serving as a mobile storage container for body heat and environmental debris. As you descend the staircase, you can feel the weight of history and at least 6 pounds of fabric pressing on your hips. Petticoats are usually crafted from linen, cotton, or if you've committed some terrible act in a previous existence, pure wool. Wool is, naturally, the preferred choice for stiffness and authenticity. It also happens to smell powerfully of farm animals every time it gets even slightly wet, which in Victorian England is essentially always. When it rains, and it constantly rains, your carefully pressed petticoats soak up water like a thirsty houseplant, capturing moisture and odours for hours, if not days. You never quite dry out. You just learn to accept the faint aroma of damp sheep as the background note of your existence. Now add in heat. A proper lady never appears underdressed, so you brave the full stack of layers. Even in July, sweat gathers in every fold. The petticoats capture it, and the resulting humidity could support a small tropical ecosystem under your skirts. It's less English rose and more portable hothouse. If you get a breeze, it doesn't cool you. It just carries the bouquet of wool, talcum powder, and stale laundry. Further down the street, the real danger comes from the wildlife. With so many folds and layers, small creatures have been known to catch a ride. A spider seeking shelter, a beetle caught in a hem, the occasional ambitious mouse looking for a fresh start. By the time you reach your destination, you may be accompanied by a full supporting cast of woodland extras. It's not unusual to stop mid-conversation, feel something tickle your ankle and try to discreetly shake out half a meadow without betraying your dignity. Victorian etiquette books are suspiciously silent on the proper response to unexpected wildlife emerging from one's petticoats. Washing the petticoats is another epic tale. Each layer is hand-washed in cold water, wrung out by hand and hung to dry over the line, which means the air around your house often carries the scent of damp barnyard. After a few washes, the fabric takes on a texture best described as stiff but haunted. And heaven help you if you spill anything tea, gravy, or worst of all, ink. Because stains set with a vengeance and tend to spread. There are stories of women who lost entire Saturday afternoons battling a single gravy spot. Then there's movement. Walking with 5 petticoats requires an awkward, hip-swinging shuffle. Running is impossible unless you're prepared to lose half your dignity and a small child hiding in the flounces. Sitting, you don't sit. You carefully lower yourself, gather the layers like you're preparing for a parachute jump, and pray you don't knock over a candlestick or crush your own hopes and dreams. All the while, society expects you to glide serenely, never breaking a sweat, never wrinkling, and certainly never admitting that you're developing a small ecosystem somewhere in your skirts. You are at all times meant to smell faintly of violets, look crisp as starched linen, and move with the grace of a swan, albeit one carrying an entire sheep on its back. When evening comes, you finally peel off each layer, releasing waves of musty warmth and enough stray leaves to replant half a garden. Your legs are streaked with red marks, your ankles itch, and your sense of humour is the only thing drier than your petticoats will ever be. So next time you see a painting of a Victorian lady, skirts billowing gracefully, remember, elegance in this era is mostly about hiding the chaos, and sometimes a beetle under all those layers, and hoping nobody asks why you smell like the livestock auction. Sanitary products, try rags, old towels, and prayer. Washing and drying these is a game of hide and seek with your own dignity. There are certain challenges in Victorian womanhood that society tries its very best to ignore, and menstruation is at the top of that list. The monthly crisis arrives with all the subtlety of a brass band in a library, and your options for managing it are somewhere between medieval and macabre. The modern promise of discreet, reliable protection is not just a distant dream, it's pure science fiction. The first step in the Victorian menstrual routine is simply admitting it's happening, which is a challenge in itself. Periods are not discussed, not at breakfast, not with your mother, and definitely not in mixed company. The subject is so taboo that etiquette books don't mention it at all, and advice columns offer only vague tips about delicate times and the importance of rest and moderation. If you're lucky, you'll have an older sister or a particularly frank aunt who will quietly pass along a bundle of rags and a word of warning. Those rags, your lifeline and your curse, are usually strips of old linen, soft from years of wear, but never quite as absorbent as you'd like. If your family is wealthy, you might have specially sewn cloth pads, sometimes called sanitary napkins, with little tapes to tie them around your waist. If not, you're making do with whatever is clean, soft and disposable in a pinch. Newspaper? Sure, a handkerchief you never liked. Now's its time to shine. Keeping everything in place is a feat of engineering. There's no elastic, no adhesives, just a complicated system of ties, safety pins, and hope. The layers are bulky, shifting, and, after a few hours, vaguely threatening. You move with a careful, stiff back. Dignity, terrified that any sudden motion will unleash chaos. And you're not wrong. Victorian fashion doesn't leave much room for error. A gust of wind, a sneeze, or an especially energetic game of croquet can be your undoing. Washing the rags is an exercise in espionage. You wait for the house to be empty, sneak down to the laundry room and scrub like your reputation depends on it. Because it does. Bloodstains are stubborn, and every Victorian woman has her own secret recipe for removing them. Cold water, salt, lemon juice, and the occasional desperate prayer. After rinsing, you wring out the cloths and try to find a hidden spot to dry them. A challenge when the whole neighbourhood monitors every inch of your laundry line. There's a communal understanding that any mystery linen fluttering in the breeze is to be ignored. But you still hang your rags behind a sheet or at the far end of the garden just in case. Of course, discomfort is part of the deal. Victorian sanitary rags chafe, bunch and leave you feeling perpetually unclean. There's a constant fear of leaks, so you carry an extra handkerchief in your pocket and perfect the art of discreetly checking your skirts. Pain relief options are limited to hot water bottles, rest and whatever patent medicine happens to be in the kitchen cabinet. most of which is just alcohol and wishful thinking. And yet you carry on. There's work to do, children to feed, and a whole household relying on your ability to soldier through. You may be doubled over with cramps and annoyed at every relative breathing in your direction, but you still smile, serenely, glide through society, and keep your secret locked up tighter than the family silver. For some, menstruation is actually a rare opportunity for solitude, an excuse to claim a few hours of rest, curl up with a novel, or at least avoid the more strenuous chores. If you're especially clever, you might even wrangle a cup of tea in bed. But mostly, you simply endure, quietly envying the men who have no idea what's happening under all those petticoats. So next time you see a Victorian lady walking with uncharacteristic caution, just know she's battling gravity, society, and her own biology, armed with nothing but old towels and an unbreakable spirit. And if she looks a little tired, give her a break. She's earned it. Gloves are not just for fashion. They're a thin, sweaty barrier between your hands and the germ warfare of Victorian public life. In the Victorian era, touching things is less a neutral action and more an act of existential bravado. Everywhere you go, market, carriage train or tea room, there are 1,000 invisible threats lurking on every surface. Door handles, railings, coins, the very arms of chairs. All are, in effect, petri dishes of bacteria, mysterious substances, and the sort of sticky residue that defies explanation. Victorians have never heard of germ theory, at least not until late in the century, but they know deep down that the world is filthy, and the best defence is to simply keep a physical barrier between you and everything else. Enter the glove, worn by women, men, and even the occasional well-dressed child. Gloves are the universal currency of respectability and survival. You don't just wear gloves to match your dress, or because the Queen says. So you wear them because the alternative is coming home with hands that smell faintly of pickled onions and the sweat of 100 strangers. Every outfit is incomplete without gloves. Cotton for summer, kid leather for winter, lace for evening, each with its own social rulebook and elaborate etiquette. Your day begins by wriggling your fingers into a pair that have been aired out overnight but never really washed, because laundering gloves is a delicate and rarely successful art. The result is a snug fit and an immediate sense of sweaty, slightly powdery protection. Picture yourself sealed inside your own fashionable hazmat suit except with more lace. You master the art of living entirely through fabric barriers, opening latches, handling currency, consuming meals, and cooling yourself while diplomatically ignoring the city's ascending funk. Being discovered gloveless becomes a crisis of social standing. Naked fingers hint at common labour or even coarser breeding. It's Victorian society's version of arriving at formal events wearing sleepwear. Yet these fabric shields bring their own perils. During sweltering months, your glove interiors transform into steamy ecosystems, perfect nurseries for everything you're desperately avoiding. Your fingers emerge soggy, puckered, and reeking of hide mixed with the day's encounters. Periodically, you execute the graceful glove renewal, a discreet finger flutter, a swift inside-out maneuver, or a strategically placed lavender sachet to combat offensive odours. Naturally, complete escape remains impossible. These barriers aren't foolproof. During handshakes, you sense another's moisture seeping through dual fabric layers. Coin handling leaves metallic residue that penetrates despite protection. Urban grime adheres to your coverings. Come evening, your gloves tell stories rivaling any journal entry. Busy days demand 2 or 3 fresh pairs, always conscious of society's vigilant scrutiny. Heaven help you if spotted wearing a soiled glove. Nothing destroys social standing faster. Cleaning gloves becomes an elaborate ritual involving tepid water, soap, and careful manipulation between squeezing and stretching. Success never comes guaranteed. Shrinking, distortion, and fading remain constant threats, so most ladies simply air them out, dust with powder, and pray. Otherwise, they're demoted to garden duty, banished behind rose bushes in disgrace. The alternative proves worse. Bare skin stays reserved for washing, worship, and dire emergencies. Being caught touching railings, handles, or heaven forbid, public publications with exposed flesh brands you as lower class or possibly revolutionary. So coverings remain constant. Through scorching heat and bitter cold, refreshments and labour, they're your silent companions in the eternal dance with Victorian contamination. When finally removed at night, you examine your hands for fresh mysteries, cleanse away adventures, and praise fortune for another day of refined survival. Because, in Victorian England, contact with anything becomes a wager, and gloves represent your sole reliable stake. Your feet stay perpetually saturated, trapped in footwear uncleaned since the previous plague outbreak. Fungal infections become virtually ceremonial in Victorian times. What adorns your feet reveals your social position, personal fortitude, and frankly, your tolerance for minor foot ailments. Let's examine the fundamentals. Footwear remains precious for most ladies. One pair must endure years of filthy thoroughfares, rain-drenched walkways, and accidental pools that may or may not contain actual water in Victorian London. Shoemakers profit handsomely from repairs, but without wealth, your boots become more patchwork than original material. Each fresh repair marks both honour and potential future leak. Modern waterproofing doesn't exist. Wax and oil provide the best defence, yet they're insufficient against British climate or the constant assault of animal waste and factory sludge. Leather absorbs everything: precipitation, muck, and that questionable seepage from beneath cobblestones. By midday, your hosiery soaks through, your feet squelch with each step, and dreams of dry toes vanished hours ago. Morning boot insertion greets you with yesterday's familiar chill, now revived for another 16-hour partnership. The stench blends aged leather, damp wool, and something disturbingly similar to mouldy cheese. You might hang boots near flames for drying, but this typically exchanges swamp-like conditions for brittle crispness. Plus, there's always the danger of shrinking them into toe-crushing torture chambers. Consider the construction. Women's boots fit snugly, taper sharply, and often feature delicate button fasteners as challenging as threading needles while blindfolded. High-button styles signal sophistication and guarantee sore fingertips. Particularly fashionable ladies might choose heeled boots, very refined, very graceful, and a direct path to sprained ankles on irregular Victorian stonework. For the adventurous, overshoes and rubber guards promise faint protection, but mostly just collect rainwater twice as efficiently. Boot interiors tell different stories. Stockings, cotton for summer, wool for winter, supposedly absorb perspiration and cushion feet, but after daily walking, they resemble sponges more than socks. Fresh pairs remain luxurious. For many, they're simply impossible. The outcome? Blisters, calluses, and the persistent itching companion of athlete's foot, politely called foot decay or the walking irritation. Some bathhouses offer communal soaking, but sharing water with strangers presents risks few accept willingly. Don't overlook the squeaking. Victorian boots develop distinct personalities over time, and nothing announces trouble like hallways echoing with damp leather's mournful wailing. Especially worn soles add the bonus entertainment of slapping and sticking with every movement. So much for stealth or elegance. Evening boot removal becomes an act of freedom. You struggle with fasteners, pull, twist, and finally extract them, sometimes dragging half your stocking along. Your feet emerge crimson, wrinkled, and embossed with inner stitching patterns. The relief feels genuine, but so does the fragrance, enough to evacuate a sitting room or send the household cat fleeing to neighbouring counties. If fortune smiles, you air boots overnight, stuff them with newsprint to absorb the worst moisture, and perhaps sprinkle talc in hopeless optimism. But you know reality. Tomorrow's journey will prove equally soggy, and you'll persevere because what alternatives exist? Footwear costs too much for complaints. Besides, everyone shares the same waterlogged predicament. So next time you slip on clean, dry, perfectly fitted shoes, remember your Victorian sisters. They travelled miles in boots worthy of their own Gothic tales. They managed with squeaky soles, wet hosiery, and determination you can only respect from your climate-controlled modern comfort. Victorian sitting rooms function as scent containment systems, complete with dried botanicals and continuous ventilation efforts. The instant you enter a Victorian parlour, you encounter a distinctive blend of visuals, sounds, and predominantly aromas. Forget the sparse cleanliness of contemporary living spaces. This area explodes with heavy drapery, dark timber, and sufficient fabric to outfit a modest carriage fleet. Every surface appears to host velvet cushions, lace antimacassars, or fringed coverings, all expertly designed to capture whatever fragrances dare to pass. The outcome? A potent mixture of previous meals, cologne, and the subtle yet stubborn essence of moist wool. The Victorian dedication to fresh air reaches legendary status. Each dawn brings window flinging even during brutal London winters, desperately hoping cross breezes will banish last evening's lamb stew phantoms and more persistent spirits of unwashed extremities. Cross ventilation resembles wishful group therapy more than actual technique. Parlour windows, when not secured against intruders, stay propped open with everything from volumes to the family feline. The result creates rooms simultaneously frigid, stifling, and gently scented with whatever ferments beyond on the avenue. But Victorians don't surrender meekly to odour. Enter the fragrant candle. Not your contemporary artisan soy creation, but a tallow construct infused with lavender essence, rose extract, or if finances allow, genuine beeswax. Igniting one becomes a small rebellious act, fighting back against the advancing tide of domestic aroma. Individual candles accomplish limited results, so parlours display bowls of dried petals, fragrant mixtures, and sachets of crushed botanicals, all intended to create illusions of gentle English summers, even while outside reality suggests factory meets thunderstorm. Some families embrace creativity, dangling citrus rinds from light fixtures or tucking spice sticks into curtain folds. The truly committed boil vinegar on stoves or burn coffee remnants, claiming victory if cabbage scents can be temporarily overpowered. Incense appears for special events or when the family pet commits unspeakable acts in corners. Parlours also serve as hygiene battlegrounds. Boots wait at entrances, but mud clings to slipper bottoms. Fires burn constantly, releasing thin coal smoke hazes that settle over everything in fine grey films. The family dog snoozes in corners, his personal aromatherapy contributing significantly. During particularly humid periods, mildew infiltrates, lurking behind heavy hangings and plotting territorial expansion. Despite all challenges, parlours stage daily existence. Guests receive welcomes, gossip gets exchanged, tea gets poured, and children practice scales on upright pianos, all while pretending air matches spring meadow freshness. Ladies sit with needlework, making pleasant conversation and secretly fanning themselves. When aromatic levels reach critical mass, men retreat to smoke pipes, adding another complexity layer to the olfactory masterpiece. Of course, there's the ongoing embarrassment battle. If sudden gusts deliver neighbours' fish stew scents, you simply smile, lift your teacup, and redirect conversation. If parlours acquire particularly lived-in qualities, well-timed weather jokes or commentary about neighbours' new fragrances usually work. When evening arrives and candles extinguish, parlours return to resting states, fragrant archives of daily triumphs, mistakes, and unspoken secrets. Leaving the room, you inhale deeply and wonder momentarily if future generations will comprehend the complex heroism of keeping Victorian parlours smelling terribly, almost like roses. Then you shut the door, leaving the day's scented drama to simmer until tomorrow's grand airing ritual. Your hair receives infrequent washing but constant covering. Bonnets function as both modesty barriers and personal greenhouses for scalp bacteria. To truly grasp Victorian women's daily existence, you must start at the summit. Literally. Hats and bonnets aren't mere accessories, they represent complete ecosystems balanced atop your skull. Theoretically, they exist to protect from sunshine, preserve your virtue, and prevent accidentally causing public scandals with wandering hair strands. Practically, they serve as scalp saunas and secret repositories for whatever lurks beneath carefully pinned ringlets. Each morning begins with rituals as ancient as the empire itself, assuming the day's headgear. Selection follows unwritten social contracts involving weather conditions, marital status, time of day, and whatever mood Queen Victoria might currently embrace. For the married or mature, it's bonnets with ribbons, velvet accents, and possibly sufficient artificial blooms to restock small nurseries. Unmarried ladies may don caps or straw hats, provided they remain adequately modest and completely personality-free. Sliding bonnets onto heads becomes delicate choreography. There are pins, dozens of them, each functioning as tiny metallic insurance against wind gusts, sudden movements, or minor existential breakdowns. Strings tie firmly beneath chins, guaranteeing both social acceptance and mildly suffocating sensations. By mid-morning, your scalp protests. Subtle warmth and pressure tingles spreading beneath fabric, steadily developing into minor climate emergencies. Victorian bonnets aren't petite affairs. Imagine inverted bread baskets lined with starched linen, layered with lace and sometimes reinforced with wire or animal hair. For extra impact, some designs project so extensively forward that you see nothing beyond your own impending disappointment. Interiors quickly become microclimates, warm, moist, and distinctly not fresh. If your hair remained damp after the latest bi-weekly egg and spirits shampoo, it won't stay that way. By noon it's gently steamed, but there's more than perspiration brewing beneath bonnets. Over time, oils, particles, and endless hair pomade residues accumulate, forming historical compost piles atop heads. If unlucky, you discover too late that something tiny and multi-legged has relocated, seeking refuge among artificial violet arrangements. Victorian manners demand silent suffering, adjusting ribbons while pretending not to notice occasional itching or crawling sensations. Fashion aside, hats and bonnets prove strategic. They shield more than sunlight and curious glances. They're judgment barriers. Forgot to brush hair? Bonnets rescue you. Botched colouring job? Wear hats. Too busy managing the inevitable tangle nest from sleeping with loose hair? Wide-brimmed straw beauty guard secrets better than any diary. Hat wearing also means following exhausting etiquette regulations. Indoors, remove them unless unmarried, morning, or temperatures drop below brisk. Outdoors, never forget them unless you wish to appear fast or worse being French. The ultimate terror involves being discovered publicly without bonnets, a social catastrophe resembling grocery shopping in nightclothes, but with greater fainting relative risks. When the day finally ends, removing your headpiece feels like breaking free from chains. You loosen the ties, pull out the bobby pins, and strip away layer after layer of cloth, unleashing a burst of heat, grit, and trapped air. Your hair spills out flattened but liberated, showing evidence of the day's struggles and carrying traces of whatever concoction you've applied to tame the unruly strands. You might discover a forgotten hairpin, or, if it's been an eventful day, the start of what looks like wildlife housing. Even so, you arrange your head coverings for the morning ahead, preparing to go through the same routine again. In Victorian times, a bonnet isn't simply decoration. It serves as armour, a barrier for propriety, and a quiet observer of every hidden scalp, scratch, and shocking revelation the hours have delivered. When future generations examine this era, these head coverings will reveal the truth. if only we dared to peek beneath the surface. Treatment recommendations swing from try additional rose water to apply medicinal leeches for bloodletting. Cleanliness won't necessarily protect you. Sometimes it's the very thing that nearly does you in. Step into the contradictory realm of Victorian healthcare, where consulting a physician might result in catastrophe just as easily as recovery. Theoretically, medical knowledge is advancing rapidly. Understanding of germs approaches and sterile surgical procedures are about to gain popularity. Practically speaking, the typical Victorian lady finds herself caught between ancient folklore and medicine's most disastrous episodes. The ordeal starts with something minor: irritated skin, a pounding head, or an odd sensation on your scalp following your regular egg and liquor hair treatment. You whisper your concerns to your mother or spouse, who instantly suggests the Victorian universal remedy: rest in bed and avoid excessive worry. When symptoms worsen, perhaps a temperature or lingering cough, it's time to summon the neighbourhood physician, a gentleman sporting an elaborate whisker display and carrying instruments that would horrify today's health officials. Victorian medical practitioners are a dubious group. They believe completely in cleanliness, yet their interpretation is imaginative. Some recommend regular washing with rose water, vinegar, or even cleaning agents. Others believe excessive bathing opens skin passages to trouble and welcomes various illnesses directly into your body. You discover quickly that every remedy includes stern cautions about doing too much while also warning against insufficient effort. The trick, seemingly, is maintaining just enough cleanliness to avoid offence without becoming so pristine that you invite misfortune. The remedies themselves span from puzzling to genuinely frightening. If you're experiencing anxiety, a frequent diagnosis for any woman who appears weary, a doctor may suggest a lukewarm soak in flower-infused water, supervised by a caring family member with no medical training. If your complexion develops strange marks from your new arsenic-based cosmetic powder, you might receive a purifying mixture containing citrus and minerals, and perhaps a touch of opium-based medicine. For ongoing head pain, physicians suggest purging, suction treatments, or the notorious blood-sucking worms. Nothing compares to having several writhing, blood-drawing creatures attached to your forehead while relatives observe in disgusted amazement. Naturally, contamination risks lurk constantly. The tools, blades, needles, and frightening irrigation devices are only as sanitary as the closest cloth and a splash of disinfectant solution. Surgeons occasionally wave their hands above a bowl of acidic liquid and pronounce them clean, but the chances aren't favourable. Wound closure happens with bare hands, and a physician's jacket, if cleaned whatsoever, typically gets only fresh air in the yard between appointments. Even basic treatments can go wrong. A healing herbal soak might conclude with you losing consciousness from overheating or developing fresh skin irritation from whatever organisms inhabited the plant matter. Medicinal pastes are applied to injuries with confident hope. If fortune favours you, they're only slightly contaminated. When situations become truly desperate, you might be ordered a climate change, meaning an extended, costly journey to coastal areas, where you can at least suffer with scenery. Despite the dangers, you lack real alternatives. Rejecting medical guidance means social destruction, and your husband's mother will remind you of it forever. So you persevere, enduring blood-sucking creatures, questionable powders, and endless amounts of floral water. If you heal, it's miraculous. If you don't, at least you perished with a subtle flower fragrance and the vague sense that more rest might have helped. As you exit the medical office, reduced in blood volume and increased in remorse, you promise greater caution. Perhaps next time rely solely on traditional folk cures, or preferably hope the problem resolves naturally. In Victorian society, cleanliness and wellness remain trapped in a bewildering, hazardous dance. The victor typically is neither party. Nobody ventures outdoors without a fragrant cloth square, the sole protection against open waste channels and pushy flower vendors. In Victorian times, the world beyond your threshold presents a sensory battlefield. Certainly, there are instances of freshly mowed lawns and the distant hint of precipitation on stone streets, but these pass quickly. The authentic urban encounter combines pungent open drains, decomposing vegetables, coal fumes, animal waste, and the subtle, persistent odour of someone's neglected washing. Here comes the aromatic handkerchief, not merely a style statement, but a survival instrument, social indicator, and personal barrier against the world's olfactory attacks. Each dawn, alongside your undergarments, underskirts, and ethical resolve, you ready your collection of cloth squares. The affluent possess unlimited supplies, premium linen pieces decorated with intricate initials, carefully creased and misted with foreign fragrances. Floral scents, citrus oils, herbal essences, or for the particularly bold exotic plant extracts. If you're financially modest, your handkerchief shows wear and affection, hand-finished edges and scented with whatever remained at the container's bottom. Departing home without a handkerchief is inconceivable. On the street, the initial warning sign, a questionable puddle, a wagon full of seafood, or the unmistakable stench of an overflowing waste pit provokes the automatic response. Lift cloth to nose, breathe courageously, and continue forward as if nothing's wrong. It's a small, refined protest against public filth. The handkerchief also serves as your wordless critique of municipal systems. I cannot repair your sewage, but I refuse to inhale it. Obviously, the perfumed handkerchief exceeds simple protective function. In drawing rooms, it becomes theatrical. Within the complex system of social signals, a quick wave can communicate attraction, tedium, anxiety, or approaching unconsciousness. At religious services, it shields against incense, or worse still, your pew neighbour's homemade scent. At entertainment venues, you touch it to your eyes during emotional moments, partially for appearance, but mainly to mask whatever drifts in from the back alley. Young people learn early about aromatic cloth etiquette. Mothers instruct daughters, never touch your face publicly, never leave without fresh fabric protection. If a young woman comes especially equipped, she conceals a plant sprig inside, giving every breath an atmosphere of refined cultivation and potentially bewildering nearby insects. The handkerchief doubles as romantic equipment. An accidentally dropped cloth square provides classic justification for gaining notice, beginning dialogue, or, with skill, escaping uncomfortable social circumstances. Men might offer their own, less aromatic, more practical versions in gallant fashion, though everyone understands masculine handkerchiefs likely smell of smoking materials and writing fluid rather than flowers. Yet the most crucial application occurs during urban strolls. Victorian London's atmosphere has personality, occasionally betraying you unexpectedly. One instant you're savouring a fresh breeze, the next you're trapped in sewage vapours from the river or backwash from a refuse wagon. A full inhalation could prove disastrous. Your handkerchief becomes the only shield between you and history's most offensive odours. You clutch it firmly, tears streaming, determination unwavering. So when evening arrives and you head home, you toss your well-worn cloth into the washing heap, already scheming about tomorrow's fragrance. Citrus for vitality, rose for boldness, or simply the most potent scent lurking in your dresser's depths. In an era where nostrils face constant assault, the Victorian pocket square serves as both armour and refuge. Contemporary air purifiers and medical masks pale beside the refined, scented courage of history's first respirator. A fabric patch, a splash of perfume, and whatever dignity you can summon. Daily clothing stays unwashed for months, perpetually scratchy and rarely clean. Sorrow reeks remarkably like damp fleece and storage crystals. If you've wondered what mourning feels like while being tormented by your own clothing, Victorian grief attire provides the answer. During this period, loss arrives with rigid fashion rules, a textile endurance trial focused as much on suffering as remembering. You must wear pure black from hair ribbon to boot buckles, maintaining this for months or years regardless of weather or personal cleanliness. The preferred material. Wool, naturally, because nothing expresses emotional anguish quite like fabric that captures every particle of body warmth, perspiration and despair, even during scorching summers. Your ebony bombazine gown becomes a furnace with arms. The interior stays rigid, the neckline constricts, and the entire outfit weighs down with crepe layers, a gauzy, irritating material that begins cardboard stiff and after humid days droops into a clammy, limp disaster. It sticks everywhere wrong and permits zero airflow. Compounding your suffering is Victorian enthusiasm for accessories. Proper mourning requires a veil long enough for stumbling, black mittens, and a bonnet so laden with crepe it resembles a miniature mortuary. These pieces rarely see washing, only occasional airing in desperate hopes that breezes might eliminate what water and detergent cannot. Eventually, they acquire an odour that's part basement, part farmyard, and entirely impossible to mask. Fragrance is discouraged for deep mourners, leaving nothing to disguise the rich blend of sadness and sweat. Abandoning mourning isn't about personal readiness. It's a strictly timed social event. Full mourning extends 2 years for spouses, 6 months for parents, and weeks for distant relatives. Throughout this time, any improper attire becomes social catastrophe. Society's harshest critics constantly watch. One white lace edge or, God forbid, purple trim, and you face whispers about your coldness or improper respect. Then there's the washing dilemma. These heavy black garments aren't meant for regular cleaning. Period black dye proves notoriously unstable, likely to fade into greenish or rusty shades at soap's mere presence. Washing happens only during absolute crises, and even then you hope water doesn't stain your hands or destroy your only mourning dress. Instead, most women depend on vigorous shaking, sunshine when available, and generous mothballs to discourage local pests. And those mothballs. They're not confined to closets. They're scattered liberally through sleeves, hems, and tucked inside bonnets. The resulting aroma is less botanical and more chemical assault. Mixed with wet wool and perpetual crepe scent, it creates a personal odour cloud that empties drawing rooms faster than heated debates. Wearing mourning tortures body and spirit. You perspire through services, collapse in churches, and constantly itch. You move cautiously, avoiding sudden motions that might tear delicate crepe or worse. Expose the accidental flash of colourful undergarments. You sit rigidly at vigils, gripping a soggy handkerchief while dreaming longingly of anything breathable. When the day arrives to abandon mourning clothes, it's not just returning to colour, it's celebrating liberation. You banish the black dress to the wardrobe's depths, vowing never to complain about starched petticoats again. But memories of grief, family, and unbearable itching linger in every fold. So, if you encounter a Victorian widow, solemn in black and moving carefully, offer sympathy not just for her loss, but for her courage in surviving months of sadness, heat, and sartorial torture. Grief in this era is a crushing burden, and sometimes it smells exactly like war, soggy livestock, and mothballs. When bedtime arrives, you nestle under covers that haven't been aired since last spring, beside a heating stone that reeks of charred onions. Pleasant dreams. In Victorian England, the day concludes much as it started, with a sigh, a shudder, and the faint but persistent scent of bygone eras. The shift from bustling household to nighttime quiet is less about comfort and more about acceptance. Bedtime isn't a peaceful drift into luxurious linens. It's a tumble into a well-used nest heavy with history and several mysterious fragrances. The evening starts with the great undressing. You strip away layer upon layer, The stays, the skirts, the shift, all having absorbed every drop of the day's perspiration, coal dust, and domestic chaos. Your skin bears imprints from bindings, your hair is a tangled testament to the day's battles, and the bedroom air carries complex notes of lavender, mothballs, and aged wool. You might pause to splash your face with cold water from the wash basin, which only emphasizes how long since anyone refreshed the water. And if you're truly fortunate, you'll don a nightgown that's been recently washed, a rare and almost sacred occurrence. The centerpiece of Victorian sleep is the bed itself, a lumpy, uneven mattress stuffed with horsehair, feathers, or, if your family is genuinely traditional, straw. The mattress covering is sturdy but coarse, the linens are rough, and the blankets are thick as small rugs, hand-mended in so many places that you could reconstruct last year's laundry inventory just by following the patches. Airing out the bedding remains a springtime dream. Most of the year, it remains on the bed, developing its own private ecosystem of dust, dreams, and occasional crumb. If it's winter, or just a typically damp English summer, you receive the pleasure of a warming pan or a brick heated by the kitchen hearth and wrapped in flannel. The concept is comforting. The reality is a scorching hot, then rapidly cooling rectangle of clay that smells like whatever the cook warmed for supper. Onions, cabbage, and wishful thinking. As you settle in, you make peace with the aromas. Your nose detects a complicated mixture. Traces of sheep from the woolen covers, burnt starch, slight mildew, and somewhere in the distance, the phantom of last autumn's apple tart. Privacy remains another scarce luxury. Bedrooms are shared with siblings, cousins, or even an elderly relative who snores like a steam engine. The fire crackles and pops, mice scamper behind the wainscoting, and wind whistles through drafty windows. The only lullaby is the house settling, floorboards groaning, pipes sighing, and the distant comforting clank of someone else's bedtime ritual. As you close your eyes, you're not just falling asleep. You're burrowing into a living museum. Every blanket has a tale. A patch from Cousin Emma's dress, a tear from last year's Christmas, an embroidery bloom painstakingly stitched during a particularly dull winter. Your dreams are perfumed by the past and shaped by the fortitude required to sleep soundly on a mattress older than yourself. Occasionally you wake at night, cold or itchy, or just to hear the quiet symphony of the house. Maybe you'll adjust the stone, roll over to escape a particularly sharp feather, or shake a wandering bug from the covers. But you drift back, content in a peculiar way, grateful for the warmth, the softness, and even the well-used comfort of it all. In the end, Victorian bedtime isn't about perfection. It's about endurance, routine, and the strange satisfaction of knowing you've survived another day. You curl up, pull the scratchy blanket to your chin, and surrender to the night, ready at last to dream. In history's cradle, dental care in the Victorian era means attacking last night's beef with whatever's available. Goose feathers, carved sticks, or even sewing pins if you're brave or desperate enough. If you're lucky, you end up with a clean tooth. If not, you just created a brand new hole. After the morning battle with your hog bristle brush and chalk-flavoured powder, you still feel something lodged stubbornly between your back teeth, a little memento from supper, which, like most things in Victorian England, refuses to budge. Welcome to the era's other great everyday oral tradition, the craft and peril of the improvised dental pick. Toothpicks are everywhere and nowhere. There's always something pointed lying around a sewing pin, a hat needle, a goose feather plucked from yesterday's writing session, or a wood chip snapped off the broom handle in a moment of household frustration. Proper toothpicks do exist, and the wealthy might carry a silver one on their chain, right next to the perfume bottle and the emergency reviving salts. But for the typical Victorian, creativity is the rule. It begins at the dining table, where the urge to extract that stubborn meat strand grows with every polite conversation. Etiquette demands you wait until after the meal, but everyone knows there's no greater temptation than that lamb scrap wedged behind your final wisdom tooth. Privately, manners slip, and you begin the delicate process. Poke, probe, and wiggle. feeling either relief as the debris surrenders or sudden regret as the pick breaks and embeds itself in your gum. Sometimes innovation goes overboard. Whittling a splinter from the nearest firewood, you risk a tongue injury and a scolding from your mother about the dangers of home woodworking. Goose feathers offer a slightly more elegant, though still hazardous, approach. The sharp tip works well until you remember it was last used to sign your uncle's testament. Sewing pins are for the truly desperate or the hopelessly optimistic. The concept is simple. Thread the pin between your teeth, gently nudge the offending fragment and pray for steady hands. The reality is, you often stab yourself, drop the pin, and spend 5 minutes crawling around the parlour carpet, hoping nobody notices. If all else fails, there's always a piece of hay from the barn or a random needle from your bonnet, though neither is likely to make your dentist, if you have one, proud. All this amateur dentistry comes at a cost. Gums bleed, enamel chips, and more than one dinner guest has been seen discreetly spitting out a piece of toothpick mid-conversation. Infection is always a lurking danger, especially if your makeshift tool is less than sanitary, which, let's be honest, it usually isn't. But in a world without dental thread, desperate times demand desperate measures. For those with humour and high pain tolerance, the toothpick renaissance is a badge of honour. You exchange stories with friends who picked their teeth with a knitting needle and lived to tell the tale, who suffered the humiliation of a broken quill, who spent the night with a wood splinter lodged in their gum and only minor regrets. On rare occasions, a travelling toothpick merchant comes to town offering sets of fine bone or ivory picks for a few coins. These are status symbols as much as tools, admired, displayed, and inevitably lost under the sofa cushions. Some families keep a shared toothpick by the basin, passing it around after meals in a gesture that would horrify future generations of dental professionals. Still, the quest for a clean tooth outweighs the risks. As the evening progresses, you lean back in your creaking chair, poke between your teeth with whatever's handy, and declare victory if you manage not to draw blood. And so, in the world of Victorian dental hygiene, it's always a gamble, splinters or clean teeth, but rarely both. If your smile survives intact, count yourself fortunate and consider investing in a nice piece of licorice root for next time. It's the closest thing to floss you're likely to find. You employ a maid to clean, but all she's really doing is relocating. The dust floors are swept with half-rotted brooms and polished with saliva and muscle power. Sometimes, literally, the house smells marginally better. But now, everything is just tacky. Victorian housekeeping is, fundamentally, a daily charade. The fantasy of cleanliness is sustained with tireless energy, and just enough actual cleaning to maintain appearances. Enter the maid wielding her battered toolkit. A straw broom with most bristles missing, a cloth that's witnessed more family disasters than the family prayer book, and a bucket of water that might as well be a soup of dust, soap, and the faint spirits of last week's mopping efforts. Mornings start with the ritual beating of the carpets. Rugs dragged outdoors and flung over the garden fence are pounded with sticks or sporting equipment in a ceremony equal parts exercise and frustration release. The dust plume that rises could suffocate a draft horse, and by the time the maid finishes, half the neighbourhood knows what shade your drawing room carpet used to be. Anything that isn't bolted down is dusted, shaken, or flapped out the window, with the slim hope that London's ever-present coal grime doesn't drift right back in. Sweeping is the next trial. The broom, limp and fraying, is less about eliminating dirt than moving it to new and unexpected locations. Under the sofa, into corners, and, if the maid is feeling creative, arranged in decorative swirls along the baseboards. Dust is a faithful companion, resettling on every surface the instant your back is turned. The phrase clean enough for visitors is less a guarantee and more a desperate hope. Then comes the polishing. Wood surfaces are wiped down with whatever is available. Spit for shine, a bit of leftover tea for stubborn marks, and sometimes a splash of vinegar if the master of the house isn't observing. If a guest is expected, everything gets a quick rub down, transforming dull mahogany into nearly respectable. The secret is not so much eliminating the grime as camouflaging it. Candlesticks are polished until they gleam, at least on the side facing the room. Silver is buffed with a flour and salt mixture, then wrapped in a cloth that will inevitably leave streaks and prints. The final step is always the stand back, squint, and declare success. If you're the maid, cleaning is not a private craft. It's performed under the watchful gaze of your employer, her mother, and, occasionally, the neighbours. Every particle of dust is a silent judgment. Every water stain a potential scandal. Heaven help you if the drawing room sofa is discovered harbouring a colony of cookie crumbs, or worse, a spider. The only thing more dangerous than dust is detection. Kitchens are their own war zone. The floor is scrubbed with caustic soap, hands red and raw, only for a child to march through with muddy boots 2 minutes later. Pots are scoured with sand, plates wiped with rags that only spread the grease around. If something appears clean, it's best not to look too closely. The air is always thick with competing fragrances: soap, vinegar, last night's stew, and the ever-present aroma of damp wool. No amount of lemon rinds on the stove or bundles of dried lavender can mask the undertone of lived-in. Guests might comment on the charming country atmosphere, but everyone knows what they're really smelling is survival. By day's end, the house is tidier, but only if you don't examine too carefully. Dust is temporarily defeated, floors are sticky with effort, and the illusion of Victorian order is maintained. At least until tomorrow, when it all starts again. If anyone asks, your maid will say it's as clean as can be, which in the Victorian era means good enough to fool most of the family, most of the time. And sometimes that's as spotless as it gets. Victorians are fixated on ventilation because foul odours mean illness. But open a window and you invite in a fresh plague, coal smoke, horse droppings, and every neighbour's culinary experiment. You shut it again and declare the room well ventilated out of pure self-deception. There's no such thing as central air in a Victorian household. In fact, the closest thing you'll get to climate control is the daily struggle with a window latch. Driven by a mixture of medical worry and hopeful thinking, the entire family is convinced that letting in a little fresh air will protect you from everything from fever to head colds. The problem? Fresh air in Victorian England is a risk at best, a toxic weapon at worst. The day begins with hope. The parlour is stifling, the bedroom's stale, and everyone agrees it's time to air things out. Windows are forced open, with a pry bar or, failing that, a gentle tap from the housemaid, and the family waits for salvation to drift in on a current. Instantly the outside world accepts the invitation. In flows the unmistakable perfume of coal smoke, sharp, bitter, and guaranteed to coat every surface in a fine, oily film. The symphony doesn't stop there. The breeze also carries in the day's unique mixture of street fragrances, manure from the morning dairy delivery, onions and boiled cabbage from Mrs. Weatherby's next door, and the faint but persistent bite of yesterday's fish market remnants rotting quietly on the curb. Sometimes, if the wind is just right, you get a hint of the leatherworks down the road, or a suggestion of the River Thames, reminding you why everyone's so fixated on handkerchiefs. And let's not forget the sounds that slip in along with the scents. The clatter of iron-wheeled carriages, the shriek of a vendor hawking questionable shellfish, and the occasional rude outburst from a neighbour with opinions about politics, weather, or your drapes. For a few moments your drawing room feels less like a sanctuary and more like a busy city street, minus the mud but still with all the attitude. You quickly realise that airing out is less about cleanliness and more about social performance. Visitors expect to see open windows, or at least recently closed ones, and you nod wisely when someone comments on the invigorating quality of the air. Never mind that everyone is squinting against the soot, or that you're secretly wiping away coal dust from the piano keys. The appearance of hygiene is, after all, almost as important as the reality. Victorian health guides are filled with dire warnings about miasma. the theory that diseases float through the air on clouds of foul-smelling vapour. If you're feeling sick, you're told to keep the windows open wide regardless of the weather to banish these invisible threats. Unfortunately, what actually drifts in is more likely to make you cough than save your life. In winter, you sit shivering beneath 6 layers of blankets, stubbornly refusing to admit that you can see your own breath. Some households get inventive, installing elaborate cross-ventilation systems, tiny windows placed just above head height to usher out the bad air, and hopefully usher in something less threatening. Others simply burn incense or douse the windowsills with vinegar in the hopes that the smell of sour wine will overpower the smell of burning coal. Eventually, the family reaches agreement. It's time to close the windows, dust the sill, and pretend the experiment was a tremendous success. Someone declares the room well ventilated. Everyone nods and life continues, slightly sootier, none the wiser, but convinced that one gust of London's finest air is all you need to stay healthy. And so the perilous game of fresh air continues, one window at a time. In the Victorian household, the only thing more dangerous than the outside world is pretending you're not breathing it in. And so, as you finally drift off, just remember you survived a whole day as a Victorian woman, which statistically makes you tougher than most modern superheroes. You endured the itch of unwashed wool, the dizzying swirl of rosewater and regret, and the ever-present anxiety of a single shared bath with the entire household. You survived lead makeup, communal bath water, chamber pots and underwear that existed only as a rumour. You faced down vinegar deodorant, dust-based cleaning, and hair routines that could break a lesser spirit. You lived through the nightly terror of crawling under questionably clean blankets next to a heating brick that might at any moment ignite both your toes and your sense of hope. But the real marvel isn't just what Victorian women put up with. It's that they kept going. They laughed. They loved. They invented new ways to pretend things didn't smell quite as bad as they did. They built the world's greatest novels, changed the course of history, and still managed to host garden parties with mud on their shoes. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed with your hot shower, your fragrant soap, and the reassuring hum of indoor plumbing, maybe whisper a small thank you to those who came before you, who faced lice, laundry, and lengthy lists of indignities so you could sleep in peace. Because history is sometimes gross, sometimes hilarious, and always a testament to how stubborn, hopeful, and quietly ingenious people can be. Here's to clean sheets, modern toothpaste, and the wild, wonderful, weird resilience of the human spirit. Sleep well and dream sweetly, free of corsets, chamber pots, and the faint scent of old onions. Good night.